Robertson scored the go-ahead goal and assisted on another against his older brother's team as the Toronto Maple Leafs beat the Dallas Stars 5-3. Brien Ray all over it on Dallas Stars television coverage. And he joins us today from the Big D. Hey, Bri, welcome. I'm going to get to the anniversary of the Iginla-Nieuwendyk trade in a second, but last night's game looked like a wild one in your barn. Was it as wild as it looked in the highlights?
Well, first of all, I think Nick Robertson is now 5-0 against his older brother in his career. As a little brother, I can respect the pride he must have having a record like that over the older brother, but I know here in Dallas and for Stars fans, they're not happy to see a record like that. And it was an entertaining game to say the least. For me, Joseph Woll was the difference, and I think that's interesting from a Maple Leaf perspective because you had the best tandem, and now half that tandem is gone for the next month to month and a half. So Joseph Woll put quite the exclamation point in that game last night. But I think from the Dallas side, they're dealing with a bit of a flu bug that has infiltrated the room. And they've had some bodies in and out, some bodies going up and down. And the first period, Dallas looked really good. They only ended up with one goal. They probably could have had two or three. Woll was very good for them. But then it just felt like after that first period is when things started to slowly roll downhill energy-wise for them. They had a push in the third, but it kind of felt like whatever flu bug is going through that locker room, it caught it in the second period. And I know Toronto hasn't been great on the road this year, but you still have Matthews, you still have Marner, you still have Nylander. Nick Robertson had a big night, but it was Nylander that seemed to bust the momentum open for Toronto in that middle frame.
I watched the highlights. Well, I saw Craig Berube say after the game on NHL Network from the scrum that Joseph Woll won him the game, so he admitted that. But They also showed the Robertson's mom in a Stars jersey and a Leafs hat. How much fun are you guys having with that whole, seems like a lot, that whole story?
You know what? I don't want to downplay your question, but this was the fifth meeting. So we've had the Robertson Bowl a handful of times now over the last couple of years here in Dallas to play up. It's always fun. If I remember correctly, I believe Mercedes Robertson, she wears the home team's jersey and the road team's hat when Jason and Nick are playing each other. So when they go to Toronto, she's going to be wearing a Leaf sweater and a Stars hat. I believe that's how she balances it. And it actually works out perfect because with Toronto being in the East and Dallas being in the West, they play an even number of games. It's one home and one away, one game in each team's barn. So if you're a mother of two kids playing in the game, it is a perfect 50-50 separation to balance your allegiances between your two children. But I can't imagine what that's like for that family every single time those two teams play. We were talking about it, Brent Severin and I, last night. I think there's only like 20 sets of brothers in the NHL this season, and we have Brendan Smith and Riley Smith from the New York Rangers coming in here next game. But how do you have that many brothers to end up in the best league in the world? Like, if you think of everything that has to transpire from pure hockey talent plus skills coaching plus juniors plus drafting plus health over the entire career that a hockey player goes through just to get to the NHL, and two players from the same family find a way to do that. Like, the odds are pretty spectacular when you break it down that way, to have two brothers playing in the NHL like the Robertsons are.
I didn't expect to spend this much time on this topic, but it's kind of fun now that you say it. And,
it is.
Well, with like the Kachucks come to mind as the most famous, but you look at the Harbaughs in the NFL, every league has it. And I think the reason, if I may, it sounds like you're kind of getting over it. You think it's a little old. I think it's because you're 0-5. Let's be honest. That's what it is. You're sick of it.
So we can stay on the brothers topic because it does go in every sport. So we're talking about the Robertsons. That's two. What is in the water in the Hughes household, because they have three? What was in the water in the Stahl household, because they had 4 or 5, whatever it was? And then even going back further, what was in the water in the Sutter household for the 47 Sutters that played in the NHL, it felt like, during the 80s and 90s?
I know. It's awesome. It's so great. Well, we talk about the mums. Grace Sutter was the mum. Like, I don't know how Grace dealt with that. Such a great
How
lady.
reckless was that household?
Still is. What do you mean was? Still is.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Brian. 29 years ago today, I'm seeing all of the Flames coverage of the Ginla-Nieuwendyk trade, which I get. Franchise great, his numbers up on the rafters. But for the Stars, they would do it again, too, with Nieuwendyk. And I feel like this was the greatest trade, not maybe even in NHL history, all of sports, where both sides came away happy.
I totally agree with you. When we were in the commercial break, I was sitting here trying to think of a hockey trade that paid off equally on both sides. I can't think of one, at least in recent memory. Nashville and Montreal both got a Stanley Cup final out of the Subban and Weber blockbuster. But other than that, I can't think of two teams or two players in any circumstance where it truly felt like an even payoff. If Calgary got their Stanley Cup over Tampa Bay, then this might truly be the greatest trade in sports history in terms of one-for-one and equality. But I really can't think of one. And, Jarome Iginla essentially spent his entire career in Calgary. I know he had the tour of duty with a couple other teams at the end, but what he did and where he put himself in that entire city, I can see the coverage today of him being as loud as it is in Calgary. Joe Nieuwendyk came to Dallas, had a really good stretch here in Dallas, but he did move on to other teams. There were other stops, I think, of significance in Joe Nieuwendyk's career. So it's not to discredit or downplay what he did here in Dallas or even to look at him as like a hired gun. He came in for the handful of seasons he was here, was absolutely phenomenal, but then moved on, and you had a few other more mainstays that stuck around or that sort of built themselves, in the years following that. So maybe there's the one slight variation in terms of coverage or celebration, but yeah, if you're talking at least hockey trades, this has to be top three all time for pure payoff on both sides.
Well, and I don't care as much for the Hall of Fame. Sorry to the Hall of Fame, because I know those guys watch. But as long as Theoren Fleury's not in it, I'm not as interested. But I thought Iggy was in, and he might be. I'm looking up Nieuwendyk's Wikipedia. He's not, and I think Joe Nieuwendyk, I think he's a Hall of Famer. Or is it just me? Do I love him too much? Am I a prisoner of the moment in Dallas?
Yeah, we could probably, when we get done talking about Hockey Brothers, we could probably go for another segment on who's a Hall of Famer, who's not a Hall of Famer. Because I think, and this might be just a byproduct of the situation, the bigger the game gets, the longer the game goes, and the deeper history the game builds, you increase your pool of Hall of Very Great compared to the Hall of Fame. And the bigger that pool gets, the wider the argument points get. Now you have to argue era of play, different factors, impact on the game. And it only gets more complicated. The argument will never get simpler for players, whether they should be in, whether they should be out. And we're probably at a point where you could give me 5 stone cold lock cases for why Joe Nieuwendyk should be in the Hall of Fame, or Theo Fleury or any other player. And I can probably find you 5 comparable players that aren't in the Hall of Fame that also meet that criteria, or I might be able to find 5 other pieces of criteria that aren't Hall of Fame worthy, because it's that nuanced. It feels like I would love to be a fly on the wall in that room. When they have these discussions, I would love to be the fly on that wall.
They'd throw me out of the room because I'd be fighting with everybody. But though both Iggy and Nieuwendyk, neither one are in the Hall of Fame. But Iggy's jersey's in the rafters, and Nieuwendyk's name is in the rafters. His number's not retired, but it's a Forever a Flame thing that they do there. So anyways, yep. I didn't really expect to talk about any of this with you, Brian, but it's a fun day, and it's the anniversary.
This is what we do.
Yeah, exactly. It is, man. Well, keep up the great work. Thanks, as always, for helping me out, and Merry Christmas, brother, to you and yours, and thanks for all you do for us.
Same to you guys and all your listeners. It's always good to talk to you, Rod.